It's a pleasure for us to have him lead this next panel on the Nordic unicorn miracle, if you will. Tal, take it away.
Thanks, Berger. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm going to bring our panelists up and introduce them, and I'll say a few words as they're coming up. So I just want to call our panelists up, Frederick, John, and Gro, and Hardy. Come on up. So as they're coming on up, and we'll introduce them, I just want to say what a pleasure it is to be here. For those of you who don't know, GeekWire is a national technology news site with roots here in the Seattle region. We're former reporters for the Seattle PI, but I have to say it's a distinct honor for me to be here today, in part because I am a neighbor of the new Nordic Museum. I have to stop myself and not say heritage in the middle anymore. Frankly, I was just happy to get the sidewalk back. The fact that it is this stellar, amazing facility is just a big bonus, and on top of that, it's a real honor to be able to take part in this panel here today. So I'd like to introduce each of our panelists, and we're going to be talking about the impact of the startups coming out of the Nordics, and thank you, Frederick, and the interplay between what's happening there and here in the United States. So first, Frederick Castle is a general partner with Creandum. It's an early stage venture capital firm. He led the first round of funding in companies including Spotify, KRY, Verta Health, Zenetta, Soundtrack Your Brand, and others. And he oversees Creandum's work with several other landmark consumer-facing services, and he previously ran the largest online search service in the Nordics at Scandinavia Online. So we'll hear from each of our panelists in just a second. But next up, John Lervik is right there, the third, is a serial entrepreneur with multiple technology companies in his history. I covered one of them after it was acquired by Microsoft, Fast Transfer and Search. John served as CTO and then CEO until Microsoft acquired the company. He has a number of other companies to his name. He's a serial entrepreneur, and it's wonderful to have him here. Gro Aaron Durnes, and you're going to have to correct me on this, all right, good, is Regional Director of Americas for Innovation Norway and Chair of the Nordic Innovation House, which is a co-working space, resource center, and networking hub for Nordic tech startups located in Silicon Valley. And Harti Suomela is Senior Advisor at Business Finland, whose mission is to catalyze new growth and create opportunities for Finland through innovation and international expansion. He's also part of the Nordic Innovation House with Gro. So let's have a warm welcome for our panel. It's great to have all of you here. So that was the introductions. I wonder if we could just take a quick moment here for each of you to talk briefly about just what you're working on right now. What's top of mind for you, so we can get a sense for your mindset. Frederick, you want to give that a shot?
Yeah, it's a tough question, but we're a small team. We're based in Stockholm. We've got an office in San Francisco and a third one in Berlin, and we try to find great entrepreneurs that use technology in some way to transform big markets. That's what's been successful in our past, and that's what we're trying to do. For my part, I spent the most of my last 2 or 3 years looking at digital health, and so versions of technological transformation within healthcare. So that's been what I've been focusing on for the last part.
Perfect. Hardy, do you want to jump in?
It's a pleasure to be here, and my name is Harti Suomela. As said, I'm based in Silicon Valley, and my company, Business Finland, is a recent entry or recent company because we merged, or my previous company, Finpro, which was the Finnish trade promotion organization, merged with Tekes, which is the innovation funding agency of Finland, in the beginning of this year. So Business Finland is now the previous Finpro and Tekes joined together. And a lot of our work currently is just to learn to work together as a single organization. We are about 600 people worldwide, about 40 different offices. And what I do mostly is work with startups, because I'm based in Silicon Valley, a lot of digital health companies, a lot of IoT connectivity companies, and also some wellness and sports companies as well.
That's great. John, tell us about Cognite. Is that how you pronounce it, first of all?
Yeah, it's Cognite. I'm the founder and CEO of Cognite. It's a software technology company. We've all seen how the data has become the new oil in the consumer world through companies like Google and Facebook and Amazon. And we now see similar things happening in the industry, where physical assets is creating even more data, and it's going to create even more values also. For example, just in the oil and gas sector, we see more than $300 billion a year in value being created from industrial data. However, the problem in the industry is much bigger and much more complex than in the consumer world, since the data for an industrial company typically is stuck away in hundreds, if not thousands of different applications. So what Cognite is about helping industrial companies liberate the data from these data silos, contextualize it so that it can be visualized for human beings, and also used for machine learning to optimize and automate the industry.
That's great.
Yeah, thank you. And I represent, as said, Innovation Norway, but also Nordic Innovation House, which I chair. And our task is to always trigger more sustainable growth in the Nordic economies by leveraging opportunities and networks abroad. So at all times, try to connect more Nordic companies to their actual markets, the big opportunities that they haven't necessarily been able to explore yet, and also to trigger innovation in corporations by connecting them to what is going on globally. But in the end, trying to get the value creation back to the Nordic countries.
That's great. We run a lot of small group discussions and dinners, and we always try and do an icebreaker question. And my favorite icebreaker question was, you're with a group of sports technology executives, and we asked what their greatest sports moment was. So I want to ask you, what is your greatest or most memorable or most significant Nordic startup moment? The time when you saw something that made you realize Nordic startups had arrived on the world stage, or another defining moment that you witnessed or took part in. What does the moment say about the potential? Frederick, I know you're getting hit with this cold. Do you want to go ahead and take it, girl?
Yeah, it's a pleasure. And as I said, I have the pleasure of being in the middle of the wave in Silicon Valley, where all the Nordic startups come and explore their opportunities. And I would say I see small wonders pretty much every day. So it's difficult to choose one. But if I look back, I would say watching the Finnish swipe in the gaming industry over the last couple of years, watching the unicorn boom out of Stockholm, and also the move into the startup scene in the Norwegian industry after the fall in oil price in 2014 have been significant milestones from my perspective.
That's great. John, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I'll take a low and a high, I guess. The low was back in 99, 2000, when I predicted that nobody would accept ads in their search results. We were fighting with Google, and we were fighting with Google to win the Yahoo as an account. And we went in and presented what we thought was a very good bid to Philo and what's his name again, Page. And then we realized that Google gave away 7% of the company to win the deal. So then we realized, I realized that really we're not very business smart in the Nordics. That was the low. The high was a year or two later. We started to beat Google in the enterprise search space, and we were able to beat them. So that, I guess, is the sort of. I think it gives a perspective on the Nordics. We are quite good at technology, but not as business smart.
Interesting. Go ahead.
So why cannot I answer to the sports question? Because it would be the Finland winning the World Championships in ice hockey in 1995. But going to the top.
Everyone's happy for you about that.
Thank you. So my favorite moment was in 2013 in startups now. So 2013 I was attending Slush, which is a startup event in Helsinki. That event started in 2008 with about 200 people meeting in a small place, and it grew steadily. And in 2013 we were in the Nokia cable factory, which was way too small for the 7,000 people then in attendance. And now The event last year was 20,000 people, 2,600 startups, and about 1,500 investors and there were people from 130 different countries. So that's a pretty good event for a country which, when I was growing up, entrepreneurship was something that, well, you started a company when you didn't get hired, I think. Nobody was willing to hire you. And even our word for entrepreneur, which is yrittäjä, means that somebody is trying to do something. So it's kind of a little bit disappointing. So slush is my favorite thing.
Perfect. All right, Frederick, I'm going to be so impressed if you don't say Spotify.
Yeah, that was bad of you to say that. I had a couple of Spotify moments. I think.
Oh, okay, I take it back. I want to hear him. Let's hear him.
I think you know, many of us still don't remember the time where there was no music streaming. But I think many of us are also so old that we've been on the piracy networks downloading MP3s and trying to tag them and rename them and get our Winamps to play them. And so, you know, from that backdrop, it was a pretty amazing first meeting with the guys at Spotify when they showed us their first client, which was a desktop PC client, and you could stream the world's music. But the moment I was thinking about was a couple of years later when actually the team demonstrated their first mobile client, right? So at the time, you know, one thing was to stream music onto a PC, and they made that, you know, really smooth and really well working. But when they demoed the mobile client, and I remember the subsequent week, I had to you know, hack my iPhone and get it sort of installed through a back door there. But I remember walking to work and being able to choose whatever song I wanted, and it just played instantly in my ears. I understood that was like, this is a new time. This is like, we've redefined how music is consumed. That was a pretty big deal, I think.
That's great. Well, it's interesting because John mentioned the strengths in business applications, and that's obviously someplace where you've made a mark. But here we have a fantastic example of a company coming out of the Nordic countries that obviously is very consumer-oriented. Do you disagree with John on the DNA of the Nordics? And what are the relative strengths and weaknesses of the startups you see coming out of the region?
It's changed a lot. It's changed a lot over the last years. I think the DNA is exactly what John described, which is really product-focused and technology-focused in many ways. And to some degree, that is enough, but only to some degree. I mean, when European companies in general, just talk about Europe and Nordic companies, when they meet US-founded and funded competitors, they lose every time. Not because their technology is worse or their experience is worse, but because their marketing is worse. And that has been the stigma of Nordic entrepreneurship over the years. But what has changed now, also including, you know, Fast Search and Transfer and Jan Marcus' more recent ventures, is that we've become much better at growing things from the Nordics. And to your point as well, because then I think we're now also we have a talent pool in Europe and in the Nordics with people that have built companies from relatively big to global. And so now we're in a different setting. I mean, when you're building your team now, you can tap into a talent pool of people who've done it, you know. And that was just simply not there 10 years ago.
Yeah, first I'd like to say that again, just proving my point, especially for Norwegians. So 2 years before you had that magic moment, Peter and I had that same moment, building our own technology, but we were not able to get deals with Universal and Sony to do what Spotify did. So I think it just again, proves my point that we're good at technology, but not good at commercializing. But I think, as you said, Frederick, the world is very, very different. In building Cognite now, we have been able to build it to almost 100 people in just a little bit more than a year, and we can get to very, very good people much quicker and with a much better quality than we did before. So, in that sense, we have a 10x better starting point than we had 10 or 20 years ago.
What's your view on this from Silicon Valley? I'd be especially interested in your perspective, both of you, from Silicon Valley.
So maybe one comment related to the marketing and product, how much you're spending on those things. I think it's a mentality thing that we don't, in the Nordics, at least in Finland, we don't spend enough money in marketing. We don't first of all, we don't have that much money for the companies to start with, so a lot of the money goes to product development. And then when you are ready to go to marketing, you just don't have anything in there. But that needs to change both in the startup's mind, that the startup has to decide early on that yes, we have to reserve this much money for this launch and marketing and everything else, and a little bit less for the product. Maybe come up with a product early on so that you are not a complete product, but you try out and in a lean way start to build the kind of understanding of what the market needs, and then also have money to spend on marketing.
And I'd like to add to that we see a trend towards the Nordic companies understanding that they don't need to move their entire company, or shouldn't actually move their entire company to the US probably, but rather focus on what we're great at in the Nordics, build technology, build products, and then rather hire people to scale and to build business in the US, and we see that as a trend. And also I'd like to echo what is already said about the talent pool now, that now there are actually a number of people that pay it forward to the Nordic, their own Nordic ecosystem, role models, former entrepreneurs or serial entrepreneurs like John Marcus here, and people successful entrepreneurs who now invest in the Nordic, invest back in the Nordic ecosystem. So it's a completely different scene.
Is that a situation that need to go elsewhere for the marketing and the scale that folks are happy with? Or is that something you'd like to change over time to make the Nordic region self-sustaining in that way without needing to go outside for that scale and the expertise?
Well, it's pretty obvious because the market is small. The market is simply too small. So in the Nordics.
In terms of the product release, yes, but it sounds like what you're talking about is also going outside for the expertise to scale globally.
Yeah, for the expertise to scale, that has already been said, growth marketing, sales. A Nordic person could probably never sell to an American like an American. But we can build products and we can build technology. And I think it's a trend that is appreciated by the entrepreneurs because they know the Nordic market and they know where to find the talent, and they have established connections and trust, like Kristen mentioned. So I think it's an advantage, definitely.
But there's an adjacent trend which is also really, which we're really happy about, and which I think we as taxpayers in the Nordics should also be very happy about, and that's the fact that Nordic entrepreneurs more rarely now choose to sell out to US acquirers at an early stage. You know that has been another one of the stigmas around European and Nordic entrepreneurship. As soon as there is a great offer on the table, entrepreneurs and investors have been tempted to just take that and sell the businesses. So what happens then is that, for sure, no sales and marketing skills are going to be built in the Nordics because they sit in the US, just as they've always had. But now, as the companies keep building their businesses and maybe even list them on a European or a US exchange, but as they keep their head offices in Europe and in the Nordics, that competence needs to be built in these businesses. And that's a big change. And so I think, and certainly hope, that the talent pool also in this field will be much deeper.
Yeah, and we're also seeing not a big trend, but a small trend at least, that we get people internationally, moving to the Nordics as well. Largely thanks to Donald probably here in the US, but also for other reasons. And I think that's so it is an opportunity for us to build up more competence for sure. But of course, it's not a negative thing to expand into the US. It's a great opportunity, and we should use that, and then really use the Nordic sort of culture and use that as a strength to recruit great people over here too.
And Finland just a month ago, in the beginning of April, we launched a startup visa type of system where a startup entrepreneur who wants to start a company in Finland, traditionally it has been quite hard to get a residence permit to Finland if you don't have an employer waiting there. So this is to trying to make Finland more lucrative place for startup entrepreneurs, and the system is so that Business Finland is evaluating the startup idea in a kind of lightweight way, and then gives a recommendation to the immigration officers that if that person is, or if that company seems to be sustainable and seems to be a kind of valid company, and then the immigration officer makes the decision if that person itself is sort of suitable to move into Finland. And there has been now, I think this is 2 weeks ago, so in the first 2 weeks we got about 15 applications and already 2 positive decisions from Business Finland. So now it's up to the immigration officers to decide what kind of how many people we're getting.
Now that is a fascinating topic, as anybody who's followed the immigration issues here in the U.S. knows. What a concept, a startup visa. We ought to look into that.
Yeah, and I think the startup visa in the U.S. has been around now for about half a year, and there's been 10 applications and 0 admitted persons in here. So
it's a great question, though. What impact are the U.S. immigration policies having on startup entrepreneurs coming from the Nordic region?
It's definitely harder these days, and I think it's too early to say, but I think just the general environment around trying to follow an opportunity in the US these days leads entrepreneurs out of the Nordics to consider twice, to be honest. I mean, obviously it's still a really interesting market, but as John Marcus already said, there are so many advantages of building a business in the Nordics these days. So, yeah, it's going to be interesting to see, but it's definitely more difficult to get a visa for entrepreneurs.
Yeah, and what I've heard through the grapevine is that the visa processing times have been longer in the past year. So it is still possible to get the visa, the L1 or B1 or whatever visa you are able to apply, but it takes longer.
Fascinating, okay. Something that Frederick mentioned about the temptation to sell early is something that we see a lot in the Pacific Northwest. There are 3 or 4 companies that, when they were acquired by companies like Google or Microsoft very early in their stages, I think back to them and I think, wow, could they have been the next Zillow's, Redfin's, that kind of company? The other big challenge, so that is obviously a common challenge among the startup ecosystem, so it's great if these companies are resisting that early on, if they can. The other big challenge is clearly funding. For somebody who's not from there, what is the landscape like for venture capital, angel rounds, early stage funding for these companies? That's right up your alley, I know.
I probably shouldn't answer it because of course, I would think
it's wonderful.
There's
right?
a lot of money. Yeah, there's a lot of money, and everyone who wants can get.
Let's hear. I'd love to hear it from you. Yeah.
I would say it's quite limited, and also the competence of most of those firms is also quite limited, with a few exceptions. And I'm not joking about Frederick; he's an exception to that. But of course, there's also many other ways to get funding. There are, family offices, and there are also industrial companies, and that are investing. So I think I think the main problem is not to get access to the money. The main problem is to get access to competent money. That can really help. That's still a problem in the Nordics.
Yeah. Go ahead, Frederick.
And I would say that it's quite, well, if you ask from the startup entrepreneur, it's horrible, never get money. My idea is best ever and I never get money. But in real life, I think the seed money situation in Finland, I'm speaking now more on Finland side, so the seed money stage is pretty good. There is really lively ecosystem around business angel network. Finnish business angels network has been really active. What we are lacking, though, is really the scaling up money. So the Series A money, which is available there to a certain degree, but it's way too small to really make it able to scale successfully globally.
Yeah. I think it's fair to say that there is a shortage of funds when it comes to sort of growth capital in Europe. I think there's not plenty. I think there's the early stage markets are relatively well served. We certainly feel that there is competition for every single deal that we want to do across Europe and in the Nordics in particular. So I think there's a healthy competition. But that said, the US is, it may be 5x in terms of when a European company raises $2 million or $3 million, the US equivalent will raise 15. And of course, some of that's going to be burnt on just higher cost, but it also just simply allows for more mistakes. Raising more, having a deeper war chest just allows you to make more mistakes. And so it forces those less funded entrepreneurs to be better. I think that's the actual effect.
But it has to be mentioned that the venture capital market almost doubled every year from 2014 until 2016, and then the growth slowed down, and actually the money put into the market was a little lower in 2017, and it has stagnated a little bit in the same way that we see in the US. But in actual numbers, obviously the available funds per capita in the Nordics is significantly lower than in, for example, Silicon Valley. But then again, Silicon Valley is a completely different ecosystem, and it stands out even in the American ecosystem. So.
And of course, we shouldn't forget the government's role. So I think all of our governments are granting money and also loaning money to the companies, starting companies. I know the Finnish situation that there is a really nice system for early stage companies to get a small amount of money for example, product development, and then when the company is starting to scale up, if they are able to raise private money, they are also able to get a matching grant to a certain amount of money from the government, which helps a lot, but it's still not enough.
So if you could pick one category or one company, what's next? And to extend the investment question a little bit further, where would you place your bet? Where would you put your money? Are there specific companies that stand out or specific categories coming out of the Nordic region?
It's easier to answer to the category than the specific company, obviously, and category-wise, AI, and I think actually the Nordics may have a good platform in that because of the knowledge that we have in sensor technologies, building on that big data and big data analytics, and then machine learning and AI. However, obviously, we do need to invest, considering the amount of investment that China is doing in this area, and Finland has done something interesting in making a strategy, government strategy on AI. When it comes to companies, from a Norwegian perspective, I would say that I expect that the companies that leverage the natural advantages of Norway and the competence from energy, oil and gas and maritime industry are interesting companies, such as, for example, Arando, Disruptive Technologies, eSmart Systems, and Senera, Cognite, obviously, and also I have to mention Forge Rock.
Yeah.
And I agree with Gru that the AI has a lot of opportunities. But I have to pick another one, so I'll pick the 5G connectivity space because of Ericsson and Nokia both are really strong there. And especially here in the US now, the trade restrictions against Chinese companies like Huawei and ZTE, they are creating opportunities in the 5G installations here in the US market space. And there is also a lot of smaller companies in that ecosystem in Sweden and Finland especially, related to this connectivity field. And if I pick a few companies from different areas, one company is Smartly.io, which is a social media advertising tool, and the founder of that company just recently had a keynote at Facebook developer event F8, so they are doing really great. IceEye is another company, Finnish company still. They are planning to install create a constellation of microsatellites with microwave radar to be able to create images of Earth, even with cloud cover. And the third one for Creandum and Sweden is Neo4j, which I think is a great database company. Finland and Sweden have a lot of tradition in the database space, and Neo4j is a really cool graph database company. They work on the graph databases and connected data, even when connected data wasn't cool, so since 2000, so they are not technically anymore startup.
Go ahead, Frederick.
Yeah, I think it is. Maybe we're in a little bit of a privileged position to have, to be able to not choose in this case. I mean, if someone
I chose for you.
Yeah, thank you.
Here for Jay.
No, but if someone would have told me that I would invest in a company that does something with containers, 5 years ago, before we left the seed round, etc., I would have said not a chance. And the same thing I think applies to music back in 2006, 2005, which is complete graveyard. So it is also a lot about who the great entrepreneurs are and why they choose a specific industry at that specific time. That said though, and tying back to the part of digital health, and to a few of the things that the Nordics have going for them, it just so happens that the largest digital telemedicine company in Europe has been built out of Sweden. And that is because there were some pretty interesting public-private collaborations. And this, I can't claim that this is a trend, but there's been a number of instances over the past 10, 15 years where really the interactions between public and private has meant a pretty good fertile ground for companies out of the Nordics. We've got several examples around the NMT and GSM mobile standards, which was exactly that. And it turns out that it continues to this day, where the way that the government half-hearted but still supported this telemedicine company out of Sweden allowed them to grow in a way which then made them attractive to every market in Europe. So this is another maybe small trend spotting.
We do have to point out, we're here on the ship canal in Ballard. When you say container technology, you're talking about something else. You're talking about cloud-based technology that wraps up an app for rapid deployment.
Thank you, yes.
John, you want to jump in on this one?
Yeah, I guess I'm too much into it to comment too much, but I think as Gro said, we should choose areas where we are strong, and obviously in Norway there's a lot of strong, let's say, pockets of strength both in the industry in terms of electronics and sensors, and partly also B2B software. So I think finding areas where you have great people and where you can see global scale is really what I would do if I was an investor.
Excellent. Okay. When you're talking about the overall connection, we touched on this a little bit earlier, but the connection between the Nordic startups and the US and North American market, is there one thing that you would change if you could? We talked a little bit about immigration, but is there something that US policy, the Nordic countries could change to make this transition to North America and the global stage easier? What would be top of your list if you could basically ignite this explosion even more?
Can I not say the one thing at the top of my list to change these things? I'll start with the practical things. It's a pleasure for me to see that Finnair has finally started a direct flight from Helsinki to Silicon Valley, because there are studies showing that when there is a direct connection between Silicon Valley and certain local, there is also a rise in venture funding in that area and also economic surplus. So that's one thing which I really highly applaud Finnair has finally now done after a hiatus of 18 years. So that's one thing which has already happened.
Yeah. What else? What would you change if you could?
Well, I don't want to go into the politics.
What would you change?
Well, a dream would be the legal framework in the US. Tax regimes, double taxing, immigration. People are afraid of doing the wrong thing, not out of not because they're criminals, but because they don't know better. And it's difficult to maneuver that legal framework in the US.
Yeah. John, you're in a unique position having sold to an American-based company.
From a Nordic perspective, I'm sort of glad that it's hard to get into the US because it makes us more competitive as a Nordic company. So in that sense, it's fine. But I think direct flights would be good. Yes.
Yeah. Okay, good. So I want to ask a few broad questions about technology in general, and obviously they have implications for the Nordic startup explosion, but are top of mind for a lot of people right now. And there's the growing concern about privacy, Facebook, personal data, along with GDPR, which we can decipher for you if you'd like to. But how are the privacy concerns impacting startups? And are you seeing situations where startups would be able to do something with data that might be innovative, but because of the concerns out there in the market about the use of personal data to target people, they're not doing it or they're being stopped? Is there a limiting factor there?
I think GDPR and the privacy issues were thought to be to help startups be more competitive, versus the big guys. But I think it's turned out to be exactly the opposite. So it's just an advantage for Amazons and Googles and Microsofts and those guys versus the startup, because they have massive amount of resources, first of all, but more importantly, they also have a very strong relationship with us as consumers, so they can very easily get acceptance for taking our data and leveraging them. While as a startup, you don't have the knowledge or the resources or the leverage with the consumer either.
Yeah. How about others? Are issues of privacy, are they impacting the startups you're working with at all?
I think. Well, the positive spin here is that the Nordics have all along been super protective when it comes to privacy and when it comes to data protection. I mean, there's been a long-standing tradition in all the 4 Nordic countries to really protect consumers' data. So actually, I think that the GDPR framework is much less disruptive to startups that start out in the Nordics than they are to any other European country. So if you would like a positive spin, that's what I can offer you.
How about a negative spin?
But I also think, I mean, there's seriously so much stuff that that companies might want to try around that are sort of in breach of prudent behavior around data. But very few of those things are sort of long term and sustainable. I don't think that it is a big inhibitor. Other than that, it is incurring costs for the companies to actually comply.
Anything else on this?
Yeah, and I think what started as a good intention has become a bureaucracy for everybody. So it's become a hurdle. Maybe if you see it as an opportunity to leverage a niche, but and if you can go for that with passion, I would applaud taking the opportunity. But I think unfortunately it's going to be a big hurdle for everybody, especially considering that the value is now in understanding the data.
Got it. And are you referring specifically to the GDPR or just generally? Yeah.
Well, this was specifically to GDPR, yeah.
Yeah, okay, good. I want to open it up to questions. Well, so while I ask this next one, if anybody else does have a question for the panel, I'm sure there's lots of things on your mind. But I'd be curious, for entrepreneurs in the Nordic region, in the Nordics, what would be your biggest piece of advice to leverage the strengths of the culture to really scale and build the next world-changing business? What would be your number one entrepreneurial tip coming from that Nordic lens?
Okay, I think it ties back to what was been said here already, which is, play the strengths. It is not like we can outcompete China on the number of hours worked per week. That is just simply not possible, and neither can we outcompete the US in terms of equity incentives and the promise of getting rich off of your equity ownership in startups. That just does not work. But we can do a few other things which center around work ethics and loyalty. I mean, just the employee turnover in European companies and in Nordic companies specifically is an order of magnitude lower than the employee turnover over here. And that just translates into so many benefits, cost, but also actually speed and quality. And then you have all the other things I've been talking about, which is really product centricity and user experience centricity. And I think between those 2 or 3 things, I think we've got a pretty good play.
Before you go, I love that because, that is a characteristic of Seattle too, the loyalty to the companies. At least, well, I guess you contrast that with Silicon Valley, everybody's loyal, right, compared to what happens there.
Oh, thank you.
But I'd like to think that's part of the Scandinavian heritage. Maybe that's just my ballad roots showing out there. What other entrepreneurial tips?
I think I would like to add to what Fredrik said. I agree with all of that. Plus also the impact employees can have in an organization. It's much flatter. So as an employee, you can have much bigger impact and feel a much bigger impact in what you're doing.
I support all of those strengths in the Nordic platform. The tip that I see maybe where Nordic entrepreneurs differ a little bit to Silicon Valley entrepreneurs is typically to keep the focus on a niche, that you have particular knowledge and expertise in solving, and pursue that long term with passion. So you need to do it wholeheartedly, and you need to focus on a niche, because if you don't, you're not gonna be the winner of that market.
And it's simple, get money from random success. Oh, okay. Seriously speaking, I think lean startup way is something which the Nordic startups have been better and better utilizing. So get out early, don't polish your product to kind of be the final 100% ready product, and then get out and realize that, okay, nobody wants that product. But try out early on what the market really wants, and then also try out outside of Nordic market, so in US or UK, whatever your main market is going to be early on, that does this work, does it make sense, what do I need to change?
Minimum viable product. We've seen a bit of a backlash against that here, so I know it's a gamble.
Okay, it's on. It's between Seattle and it's on.
Good. Go ahead.
Great, thank you. My name is Michael Roding. I'm a former colleague of Berger and Vahes, but now involved in cross-border innovation and advisory. But my orientation is east toward Asia. And first I want to thank you for being here, and I want to encourage more direct flights from Finnair and other Scandinavian airlines to Seattle as well, because I think it will pay off for you. But I'm really curious about your perspective, both as potential markets, as competition, and also relative to the financing ecosystem of Asia these days, China being, of course, top of the list, but Asia more broadly.
I can start. So from a Cognite perspective, and I would say B2B software perspective in general, at least my experience, China is a no-go. We don't even consider it. I've tried before, it's waste. But other parts of Asia is clearly can be quite good. Japan in particular, if you have good connections to get started. But of course, the rest of Asia again is a little bit like Europe. There's many countries, there's many different cultures, so it's quite expensive. So I think you need to be at some scale before you go into Southeast Asia. And this is again from a B2B software perspective.
Yeah, what about Asia?
At least in Finland, there has been an influx of investments from Asia, especially from China, both really large ones and then a number of smaller ones. Unfortunately, I haven't yet seen what is the impact of those. They are too recent, so I really don't have a good answer for this, but I see the kind of trend of getting more money from there.
Yeah, we actually took the whole team and flew over to China for a good 10 days last spring, asking ourselves the exact question. So what is it, how does Grianum need to think about China? And the fear going there was that our companies were ultimately going to be just outcompeted by Chinese peers or competitors. We came out of that week feeling that would only be true if we chose to compete in China. So really a lot of what's going on in China, and actually I would say 90% of the value creation on the Chinese stock exchange and in the venture funds are because of the growth that is in China. So rather than looking at the Chinese as a actually I would just right now not think of them as a fantastically great source of capital, because they would invest not exactly that it will not be on strategy for them. And I would also not think that they are fantastic acquirers of your business unless you're in parts of financial technology. I mean, there's been a few acquisitions from mainland Chinese companies in European and US tech companies. But the funny thing is that those acquisitions have been made to support Chinese as they travel abroad. I mean, think about it. That's been the agenda. So it's really about catering to the domestic audience, but acquiring technology and platforms outside. So that is the perspective that I can offer.
And I'd like to add to that we used to say that if you're a software company, you don't have to be in Silicon Valley, but you need to understand what's going on there, because your competitors and your partners' potential exits, that's where they are. And I think if you're in hardware, you need to think the same way about China.
Well, this is great. Oh, go ahead.
Hi there. My name is Sebastian. I'm a Danish-American dual citizen, college student also. I have a question about blockchain. You were talking about different like privacy and data and things like that. Is blockchain on your radar as far as like new technology and possibly its disruptive qualities?
Thank you for correcting that oversight. Very good. Thank you.
Yeah, it is very much on the radar of investors like ourselves and many of our peers. There have been entire funds raised on just investing in blockchain-enabled companies. So the short answer is yes. I personally think that there's been it is still very much a technology, and a lot of the value that's been created in and around blockchain so far has been as an effect of people's desire to speculate in cryptocurrency. That more than the actual, proliferation of currencies or tokens. But having said that, I mean, it's a pretty big business. Maybe not necessarily one that you want to touch or get too close to, but there's a lot of business with crypto.
You seen blockchain startups coming out of the Nordic region at all?
Yeah, definitely, but most of them naturally very early stage. And I totally believe that blockchain is one of the most interesting technologies to follow going forward. And like Frederick said, I don't like the fact that the focus has been on trading lately, and then after the correction, luckily we're back to looking at what the technology can actually solve, and I think that's important going forward.
And I think most of the solutions I've seen coming from Finland, I'm talking about the Finnish companies because I know them best. So most of the solutions have been more you slap on blockchain technology on an existing product, and you hope that it makes it more lucrative, and that doesn't really work. It's not solving problems of a problematic company. And I've seen only a few of those companies which are really building a blockchain technology company from ground up, and those might have a better chance of succeeding.
So we're coming to the end of our time. I want to ask each of the panelists to give us their one takeaway, the thing that they would leave this audience with. But before I do that, Hardy, I want to ask you, the subject of Nokia has come up a few times here.
So, okay.
And I want to ask you, have the people of Finland forgiven Microsoft?
I worked for Nokia 15 years, but that's been a long time ago, so I don't know.
Did you hear my question? Have the people of Finland forgiven Microsoft yet?
No comment.
What would be your...
That's a no.
No comment.
What would be your key takeaway?
My lawyer says that I should say, no comment. And I've pleaded to the fifth.
Your key takeaways for this audience.
So my key takeaways over the last 4 years in Silicon Valley is definitely that there are so many exciting things going on in the Nordic region, things that you would never, not necessarily the ones that you read about in the newspapers, but the ones that work hard every day to try and take their passion to the market. And I'm surprised all the time, and I feel very optimistic about what we can bring to the market going forward.
Yeah. John?
Yeah, I agree with Glo. I think when you look at the Nordics or Nordic companies, you tend to probably underestimate the quality of the technology and the people when you talk to them, because they're much more understated than Americans. So I think that's what I saw, for example, when Microsoft acquired Fast. They have actually moved more and more of search technology and also personalization technology from Redmond to Norway now. So there's more people. There's quite a few more people now working for Microsoft R&D in Norway than when they acquired Fast.
I have to repeat two things. First of all, what Gru said, focus. The company needs to really focus on a niche and not trying to solve everybody's problem, and then get out early and find out what your product really solves and who is it serving.
And Frederick, before you go, did you know you have like a doppelganger here in the Seattle tech market? Do you know who it is? Tell me. Isn't he the spitting image of Rich Barton? Yeah, he is. This
is awkward. This is really awkward. I don't know if I should be proud or...
All right.
Do you like the moderator? I don't really like the moderator anymore.
Rich Barton's I'm sorry, what did you say?
I was just asking him if he likes the moderator anymore.
That's right.
Because I don't anymore.
Co-founder of Expedia, so in good company.
This whole Nokia thing, you should never have brought it up. No, I think as a parting remark, thanks a lot for hosting the panel. Birger, where are you? You're over there. Thanks a lot for making this happen and for inviting us all. I think it is pretty. My closing remark would be this: bringing a lot of people into this museum talking about technology is not a coincidence, I think. And it's not a coincidence that we're talking about entrepreneurship either. I think that both those two things are today such an important and integral part of the Nordic society, and they will continue to be increasingly important. So that is really, for us, of course, we're super happy about that. I think it's great that as a part of the museum opening, that we also got this perspective into the agenda. Thanks a lot for that.
That's great. Well, Frederick Castle, John Lervik, Gro Arendurance, and Hardy Suomela, thank you very much for being here. Welcome.